Hi, boys and girls. Mrs. Blackburn here, and I have a Fountas and Pinnell Heinemann book to read called The Raft. It was written by Jim LaMarche. Imagine that you wake up from a nap by a river and there's a raft floating right next to you. Can you imagine what kind of adventures that you would have and what you would do? Well, let's find out what one boy does as I read The Raft. This has some amazing illustrations in it. I know you're going to love it. Here's the first one. There's nobody to play with, I complained. She doesn't even have a TV. Dad grinned. Well, she's not your normal kind of grandma. I guess, he said. Calls herself a river rat. He chuckled. But I promise she'll find plenty for you to do. And you know, I can't take you with me this summer, Nicky. There'll be no kids there, and I'll be spending all my time at the plant. I felt tears starting again, but I blinked hard and looked out the window. A river rat. What do you think that is? Make a prediction? That afternoon, I stood in Grandma's yard and watched my dad drive away. Dust rose up behind our car as it disappeared into the pines. Well, we can't stand here all summer, said Grandma. Come on, Nicky, it's time for supper. Honey or maple syrup on your cornbread? Grandma asked. I don't like cornbread, I mumbled, poking my finger into the syrup pitcher when she wasn't looking. If you're going to do that, you'd better wash up first, she said. She had eyes in the back of her head. Bathrooms through there. I pushed the doorway curtain aside and walked into what would have been a living room in anyone else's house. Books were scattered everywhere, on the tables, on the chairs, even on the floor. 3 of the walls were cluttered with sketches and stuffed fish and charts of the river. Several fishing poles hung from the 4th, with a tackle box, a snorkel, and a mask on the floor beneath them. It looked like a river rat's workroom, all right, except that in the middle of everything was a half-finished carving of a bear. Been carving that old fellow for years, Grandma called from the kitchen. The real one hangs out in the dump. Now come get your supper before I feed it to him. Dad was right. Grandma found plenty for me to do. In the morning, I stacked firewood, then helped her clean out the rain gutters and change the spark plugs on her truck. The afternoon was almost over when she handed me a cane pole, a bobber, and some redworms. Fish fry tonight, she said, showing me how to bait the hook. That river's full of fat bluegills. Drop your line near the lily pads and you'll get 'em. Down at the dock, I looked things over. The lily pads were too close to shore. There couldn't be fish there. I walked to the end of the dock and threw my line out as far as I could. Then I sat down to wait. And wait. And wait. My bobber never moved. There's no fish in this stupid river, I said out loud, disgusted. We had hamburgers for supper. Look at Nicky. He's not really making the best of things, is he? Do you blame him? Why do you think he's so upset? Give it another try, said Grandma the next evening. I'll bet you catch something. Don't count on it, I thought. I headed back to the dock. I threw my line in the water, then I stretched out on the dock to wait. I must have fallen asleep because I was awakened by loud chirping and chattering. I sat up and looked around. A flock of birds was moving toward me along the river, hovering over something floating on the water. It drifted downstream, closer and closer, until finally it bumped up against the dock. Though it was covered with leaves and branches, now I could tell that it was a raft. What was it doing floating down the river all by itself, I wondered. I reached down and pushed some of the leaves aside. Beneath them was a drawing of a rabbit. It looked like those ancient cave paintings I'd seen in books, just outlines, but wild and fast and free. I cleaned away more leaves, and it was like finding presents under the Christmas tree. A bear, a fox, a raccoon, all with the wild look of the rabbit. Who had drawn them, I wondered? Where had the raft come from? So here's a raft, which could be significant because it is the title of the book. Do you suppose the raft just randomly floated toward Nicky, or could something else have happened? It's kind of strange that all those drawings were on it too. I ran up the cottage. Grandma was on the porch reading. Do you have some rope I can use? I asked. In the shed, hun, she said. Help yourself. She didn't ask me what I needed it for, and I decided not to tell her yet. I pushed the raft into the reeds along the river's edge, then tied it to the dock so it wouldn't drift away. All the while, birds flew over my head, every now and then swooping down to the raft as if it were a friend. A crane waded through the reeds to it. A turtle swam up from the bottom of the river. The moon had risen yellow over the river by the time I went up to the cottage to go to bed. So this city boy finds a raft on a river. What are you thinking about the different things this raft might represent for Nicky? Do you think it's a little bit of freedom, some access to the nature, maybe a little bit of transportation? He can explore and discover things. I was already down at the dock in the morning when Grandma appeared with a life jacket and a long pole. She didn't seem surprised by the raft at all, or the animal pictures all over it. How did you know? I started. Let's go, Grandma interrupted, tossing me the life jacket and stepping onto the raft. She pushed the pole hard into the river bottom, and we moved smoothly into the current. Your turn, she said after a few moments. She showed me how to hold the pole and push, and I pulled us to the middle of the river. Even there, the water wasn't over my head. We pulled the raft up the river, then let it slowly drift back down. The birds kept us company the whole time, soaring, swooping, singing. Some even landed on the raft and rode with us for a while. Hitchhikers, Grandma called them. After that, I had a little time for anything but the raft. I raced through whatever chores there were, then ran down to the dock, wondering what animals I'd see that day. It wasn't just the birds that the raft attracted. One morning, 3 raccoons followed me along the shore. Another time, a turtle climbed on board and spent the morning sunning itself. And one afternoon, I saw a family of foxes slip through the trees along the river. When the weather turned too hot and sticky to sleep indoors, Grandma helped me put up a small tent on the raft. I lay on top of the cool sheets and read comic books by flashlight until I fell asleep. One night a noise woke me up. There in the moonlight stood a huge buck. He looked right at me, then lowered his head to drink, as if I wasn't there at all. I found Grandma the next morning working on her bear carving. "Do you have some extra paper I could draw on?" I asked her. She brought out a big sketch pad and a pouch filled with thick pencils and crayons. "I've been saving these just for you," she said. "Better take these too." She held out the snorkel and mask. Never know when they may come in handy on a raft. So what has Grandma shown us about herself so far? Does she match your predictions about her at the beginning of the story? At the beginning, she was making Nicky do all kinds of chores and work, right? Do you think maybe that she put the raft there for him? You think? The sun was hot that afternoon, so I pulled into the shade of a willow, then waited to see what animals the raft would bring. It wasn't long before a great blue heron whooshed down with a crayfish in its bill. I grabbed a pencil and began to sketch. I felt invisible as the bird calmly ate its lunch right in front of me. Then it preened its feathers, looked back up at the river, and flew off. That night I showed my drawing to Grandma. "Not bad," she said. "Not bad at all." And she tacked it on the wall on top of her own sketches. I'm making a connection right now. I've seen those herons, blue herons on the lake. I bet some of you have too. The lakes around here. One day I pulled upriver farther than I'd ever been, near a clump of tall cattails. I startled an otter family. They drove underwater, but as with the other animals, the raft seemed to calm them down. Soon they were playing all around me. Grandma had been right about the mask and snorkel coming in handy. I slipped them on, then hung my head over the raft and watched the otters play, chasing fish, chasing each other, sometimes just chasing their own tails. I kept very still, but they didn't seem to mind me watching. They played keep away with a small stone, then tug of war with a piece of rope. It was like they were showing off for me. They even let me feed them right out of my hand. Some mornings, Grandma would make a bag full of sandwiches and thermos of icy lemonade. Then we'd put on our bathing suits, grab some towels, a lawn chair, and an inner tube, and pull upriver to her favorite swimming spot. "I've come swimming here since I was a girl," she told me as we tied the raft to an old dock. "The Marshalls used to live here, all 10 of them. What a herd of wild animals we were." While Grandma watched from the inner tube, I practiced my flying cannonballs. Then we'd eat our lunch, and she'd tell me stories about growing up on the river. My favorite was the time she'd found a small black pearl inside a river clam. "I still have it," she said. Looks like they're having a lot of fun. A lot of animals around too. Somehow on the river it seemed like summer would never end, but of course it did. On my last day I got up extra early and crept down to the dock. The air was cool and a low pearly fog hung over the river. I untied the raft and quietly drifted downstream. Ahead of me, through the fog, I saw 2 deer moving across the river, a doe and her fawn. When they reached the shore, the doe leaped easily up the steep bank, then turned to wait for her baby. But the fawn was in trouble. It kept slipping down the muddy bank. The doe returned to the water to help, but the more the fawn struggled, the deeper it got stuck in the mud. I pushed off the river bottom and drove the raft hard onto the muddy bank, startling the doe. Then I dropped into the water. I was ankle deep in mud. "You're okay," I whispered to the fawn, praying that the raft would calm it. "I won't hurt you." Gradually the fawn stopped struggling, as if it understood that I was there to help. I put my arms around it and pulled. It barely moved. I pulled again, then again. Slowly the fawn eased out of the mud, and finally it was free. Carefully I carried the fawn up the bank to its mother. Then quietly I returned to the raft. From there I watched the doe nuzzle and clean her baby, and I knew what I had to do. I pulled the stub of a crayon from my pocket and drew the fawn in all its wildness onto the gray boards of the raft. When I had finished, I knew it was just right. He looks a lot different from the beginning of the story, doesn't he? Does he look a lot happier? After supper, I showed Grandma my drawing of the fawn and told her my story. "It's perfect," she said. "But we need to do one more thing." She hurried up to the cottage. When she came back, she had tubes of oil paint and 2 brushes. Grandma helped me trace my drawing with the oil paint, which soaked deep into the wood. "That'll keep it," she said. "Now you'll always be part of the river." "Just like you, Grandma," I told her. "A river rat." Grandma laughed. "Just like me," she agreed. Why do you think it was important for Nicky to draw the fawn on the raft? If you were thinking it's because it was an important memory he wanted to remember forever, you're right. You're so smart. Okay, and that's the end of that story. So, have your ideas changed about what a river raft is by the end of the story here? The last 2 lines of the story are important, aren't they? I'm going to read them one more time. The last 2 lines here are... get to them really quickly. The last 2 lines are... "Just like you, Grandma," I told her, "a river rat." Grandma laughed. "Just like me," she agreed. So those last 2 lines are really important because at first he thought his ideas of the grandmother were that she was kind of a little crazy. He didn't want to go. But spending time with that family member, his thoughts and viewpoints of that character changed, didn't it? So once again, we have this message about family being important, spending time with family. We have another author that's trying to get that message across and that bond that we have with family. Why do you think that his attitude changed towards his grandmother? Why do you think? Maybe you're right. Maybe it is because they got to spend time together. It was just the 2 of them. There were no other distractions. I know a lot of us have had to stay home lately, and we've had that special time to spend with family members, and we have gotten closer to our families. That's something special that has come out of this time that's been a little challenging. I hope you enjoyed the story. I thought it was very nice with some beautiful illustrations. Okay, that's all for today. Don't forget that you have the remaining activities in your folder for today, and you do need to make sure that you're listening to the read alouds first and then doing the activities. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.